All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Tim McDonald, and you are joining us on the Business of Speaking. And today, my guest is Judi Fox. How you doing, Judi?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for joining me today. And just to let everybody know, the whole premise of this show started from me doing interviews with speakers, and I was learning so much because I'm not so concerned about what they talk about on stage as much as I am about their journey of how they got to the stage, which is typically what we don't hear them talk about when they're on stage. So this is my way of sharing these conversations with the world. So thank you for playing along with me, Judi.
Yeah, I'm here for the journey. So I think that is what is fascinating about us as humans. We want to know what the journey is.
That's exactly what I feel too. And so many times we, are only presented with the success or the outcome instead of what it took to get to that point. So why don't we start there and just have you kind of tell us your story of how you got started speaking?
Yeah, so I graduated from college in 1999, and the reason why I share that is because back then I couldn't Google what is my next job profession, or I couldn't look anything up. So in some ways, what gets in your eye line becomes the thing you start looking into or considering. So because my dad is an engineer, I became an engineer. He took me to work one day. He introduced me to what he does. He also introduced me to a female leader in a engineering role or department, and so I was like, oh, I'll do that. So that was a really pivotal moment. I became a chemical engineer, but the key really actually that I became got the first what's the word? The first glimpse of being a speaker was when I worked in California. Somebody had a cassette tape, and I still, it's the 90s, the early 2000s. I still had a cassette tape deck thing in my car in my Honda Civic. And somebody gave me a whole cassette tape of the National Speakers Association top winning, award winning speakers. And I would play these on my 30-minute commute to work and back every single day. And I just fell in love with them. And I didn't know who these people were. I could not Google them. I just was like fascinated by the concept of storytelling and how these people were just moving their audiences. And I moved in my car and I'm like, how did I come across this? I didn't know that you could do this for a living, was just speak and people listen to you. Like I used to knock on everyone's doors in the neighborhood and be like, I'm putting on a play in 5 minutes from my porch, and try to get adults to come to my play at my front porch in my house. Like that's kind of, who does that?
So
Yeah.
you've always from a very young age, you've always kind of had that I want to be up on the stage and have an audience.
Yes.
And
Oh,
then
I just remembered I even made up a pretend radio show when I was a little kid, and I would record it and I'd be like, all right, the next caller calling in. And I would have a whole microphone and play along. And I thought I could play it for my friends when they came over. They'd be like, you're on the radio?
I love that. I love it. You're giving me a whole idea for something in my past, but this isn't about me. This is about you. So so how did you move from listening to those tapes? And by the way, you're reminding me of something I read about President Obama and how he became a great orator was listening to all the pastors and the reverends at churches who were really good at giving sermons and taking that. So it's like that's the first thing that popped into my mind when you said that. But how did that lead you to actually getting up on stage like one of these speakers?
Yeah. So it all probably started when I moved up to corporate for that company. So a Fortune 500 company, moved into the corporate office. And my bosses, I had different bosses along the way, but one of them, or actually probably two of them, recognized how much, probably just from listening to all of these speeches. I mean, we're talking like I listened to these on repeat for like a year, maybe 2 years. I just love them. I don't know. I wasn't listening to music. You couldn't tell me who an artist was, but I could be like, oh, this National Speaker Award speaker, like in the 90s, and here's what they talked about. Oh my gosh. To this day, I can still quote some of the things they would say in their speeches. So from that, they recognized that and they started putting me in front of any new employees. They would always do a big onboarding event, and they had me speak at this event as a recent new employee because I was only maybe a year or 2 years into this company, and they would have me speak. And I didn't think about it at the time, but I was like, oh, this is great. So there's probably like 100, maybe 200 people in each kind of onboarding class. And I just, became more natural for me to just say to myself, oh, that's part of my job. So, and then from there, the next step was to actually recognize that I really like this. I like talking and getting on stage. So the next step was I joined a Toastmasters, which is very fascinating that I didn't actually realize the National Speakers Association. I assumed you already had to be a big speaker. Either I didn't Google it or I didn't understand it, because now we're in the 2008, 2009 time range. And I didn't necessarily, yes, we have the internet at that point and we have all of the things we can look up. But I looked up Toastmasters. There happened to be one meeting right around the corner. I went to that and joined that group. And that's how I started learning how to craft my own speeches, started recording them on YouTube. One of my early Toastmasters speeches is on YouTube. I think it's at like 20,000 views or something. So it's just been like, each time it's been years basically to get to the point that now I've been on stage at a lot of bigger events, like 500 to 1,000 people audience, and just doing these live streams, being comfortable on camera. It's like, what is that? 2008 started with Toastmasters and then just kept going from there. It was not a, what's the word? Wasn't fast journey.
Well, it wasn't an overnight success.
It wasn't until 2018 that I really I hit about 3 million views on my videos.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious because I mean, I'm familiar. I actually went to some Toastmasters events when I lived in Chicago. And, I know that it really helps you develop that confidence in your skills as a speaker. I also know that they don't pay anybody. You'd pay them to belong. So, so do you remember the first time like somebody actually asked you to speak where you were getting paid?
That That's definitely in the last couple of years. So it's basically when I got more active on creating video, especially on LinkedIn, is when, by that being circulated and people seeing you speak, because it was one thing to have different things on YouTube, but it's a whole nother thing to be in front of either conference organizers or people who are running the events. So it's only since about March of 2018 that has been paid speaking engagements, because all the way up to that point in time, um, knowing how to craft a speech and be able to present myself always just served me for winning a contract or for getting in with a company. But I didn't necessarily see it as a way to get on stage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, there's so much here for that I'm so curious about. I don't know how I'm gonna cram it into the short time we have, but I'm interested because, that's the one thing that I've really recognized about speaking, right? My limited exposure to it over the last 10 years has always been about, oh, you get up on stage, you get paid, and you get to travel to, some nice cities, some not so nice cities, and then you come home and you do it all over again. But there's so many different facets to it, and you just brought up a very interesting one, that you were actually using your speaking to generate business for your business instead
Mhm.
of looking at your speaking as your business. It was actually part of your business, right?
Correct. Yeah, because I saw the world of speaking and I saw a lot of people that I really, really admire in that space, and they were traveling more than I wanted to travel at the time. I love to travel, but I didn't want to make it my entire goal. I just created Judi Fox Consulting. I had different packages that I offered for clients, for customers, for corporate offices, and so that's more of the direction that I was headed, because it made more sense to me to do a more of a sales training or more of a sales workshop or a LinkedIn workshop or business development or networking, and work out those types of contracts. And to me, those were internal inside the company speaking engagements, but I didn't necessarily see them as speaking engagements. I saw them as, I'm just going in to consult and I'm in front of the whole room, like speaking at like a company like Mass Mutual, for example. Um, it's incredible, but for some reason I shift the contracts to make it so it's like a retainer or it's some type of business that's not just a one-time speaking engagement.
Wow. And so, how, after you started getting paid to speak, has that changed the business model for you, or has it really just helped kind of it evolve in new ways?
In some ways, I'm really grateful that I set my business up that way because I did watch when a lot of the events shut down because of travel and everyone being, we're all going to stay home because of coronavirus. I was grateful that my business model was not built on thinking of it as only being able to go out and do speeches and then get paid. So you're right. I never shifted my business model. My business model has always been in the consulting mode. And I don't know if that just starts because that's how my chemical engineering degree then moved into being a consultant for corporations. And so I've worked with Kraft, I've worked with Tesla, I've worked with major brands, and I never saw it as just speaking. And I know that that doesn't probably fall in line with a lot of other speakers out there, but I almost didn't want to. I don't quite know how to explain it, but I liked the idea of consulting for these companies.
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of value in that, and I mean, especially now, I mean, a lot of people are going, man, I wish I would have thought of this, you know, 2 years ago, a year ago,
Yeah.
5 years ago. So, and I'm really interested because as we do see the shift more towards, people doing more remote things, more video conferencing, and events. And even though, a lot of the restrictions are being lifted and we have a lot of uncertainty if there's going to be another wave, the feeling that I believe is that, it's going to be a long time before we get back to the mega conferences in person like we were so used to leading up to, into this year. So, when you look at everything that you've done and having to go remote, how has that, you know, I mean, I know you were doing a lot of remote, but you were also going to a lot of these companies. How has that changed, how you work with some of these organizations that you were actually going into? Are they still working with you? Are they still, or have they changed the way that they're working with you? Can you explain a little bit about that?
So I would say I had two parts of my business. One part was the corporate space where I had maybe small companies to medium size. And then I had transitioned away from larger corporations over the past 3 to 4 years. I have kind of transitioned. I appreciate that space, but because I realize being a smaller sole proprietor, kind of small consulting firm over here, I was maybe doing more kind of fractional work to a bigger project, which was fine, but I had moved myself out of that space. So now I'm right in my sweet spot, which is about 10 employees or less companies. And there's a lot more flexibility with those kinds of companies, especially because they are sometimes a little scrappier or they're a little bit more able to pivot faster if you have a smaller team. So I actually feel like in the last year, I had completely pivoted without knowing that this was all going to happen. It just became more of a, how do I say this? I liked a little less red tape. I liked working with more mobile teams or smaller organizations or even just individuals. So I have some clients now that have 3 to 4 million followers on social media, but they have a very small team because they're an influencer. They have a team, but it's not huge, if that makes sense. And that's a whole different space than trying to navigate a corporate office.
Well, yeah, and
So
I think it's really, I think, insightful how you've learned, one, how you set up your business from the get-go, but then two, recognizing as you started being pulled in a direction and didn't see that as being the right fit for you and what you enjoyed the most, made another adjustment to be able to focus on those smaller size companies to have this success. So I think there's a lot, for people to learn that, just because we start doing one thing doesn't mean we need to stay there if it's
Yeah,
not
no.
serving us.
You can still serve. So I ended up hiring a company or a woman who is in the smaller business space because I had worked so many years in corporate, Fortune 500, Fortune 100, Fortune 200, all those companies. I had worked in that for over 20 years. So that was my language, that was my space. So I ended up hiring a woman who has 2 7-figure businesses and she's a rock star. I freaking love her. And I hired her to help me do that transition. So she kind of just set it all up. And she was like, because how do you move from thinking in corporate to thinking in small, 10-person companies and less? And what kind of packages are attractive to them, or what kind of language, and how do you make that transition? And she made that transition amazing for me. So I'm grateful to this day because I just really leaned in. I hired her July of 2019. So it's not that long that I literally was just like, done. I have to like go. I had one foot in one kind of the corporate, and then I had one foot in small business. And then I put both feet in small business now.
Wow. And so what are some of the ways, I mean, I know obviously that, you use social media quite heavily and you use a lot of video to kind of put, content out. How are you saying, or seeing the most success in having people find you versus you have to going out and search clients?
I think if you've heard like all of the things about saying we have to have maybe, I have a puppy, by the way, he's making some noise. So I have heard along the way that you need anywhere from 10 to up to sometimes 30 touch points with someone before they hire you, before they close the deal, before they sign on the dotted line for a contract, especially if it's a 10K contract, above it's, 50K, whatever these size contracts are, there has to be trust there. High ticket equals high trust. And I wrote a post on social media about that. And the point is, when you are putting yourself out on social media, every single time you post, every single time you show up, that's a touch point. That gives the feeling of, I don't know what to call it, either intimacy or empathy or connection to somebody watching you. You may not necessarily have it back to them because they're watching on a screen. So, hi, everybody watching right now. But and if they reach out to me, that's a touch point back where now we can go through the direct messages. I can do a call to action right now and say, hey, if you're watching this, send me a direct message. Let me know you're watching. What did you think? Is there anything I can answer for you? And then you've invited the audience to take action with you.
That's so insightful. And I think one of the things that I think I love most about that is it's all about, you recognizing that touch point and not letting it die. You have
Mhm.
to take advantage of it, right? You need to follow up and follow through with it.
Yes. And it's just, people talk about being consistent, but a lot of times consistent content is not the only way to be consistent. Consistent is consistently getting on these live stream shows and doing a call to action that just does what I said, which it may be how many people from watching this. If there's 100 people watching, maybe 10 people will take action to jump into my direct messages and say, hey, I want to set up a call. And then from there, who turns into clients? And I always have to ask everybody I work with, how many clients do you actually need a month? How many contracts with companies or whatever business you're working with? How many do you actually need per month or per year? Because sometimes people are trying to do massive cold outreach to such a high level that they actually spread themselves too thin, and nobody feels like they get that intimacy buildup of trust because they're spreading themselves too thin. So I dial it back and I just say, you know what, I have my master's in business sustainability and environmental management, which is a really random master's degree that I got throughout that whole program that I mentioned. But what that really taught me is really grounding myself in sustainable activities, which is how much do you actually need? How many touch points? What is it taking to close? And how do you just keep staying top of mind with your network? So
Awesome. One final question for you before we kind of wrap up is, if you were to, knowing what you know now, and looking back, if you were to give somebody just starting, like in where you were, one piece of advice into getting into the speaking business, what would that be?
um, that you just can't have it all planned out for where it's going to go. I think a lot of times I watch people try to map out, and it's nice to map out where you want to go as far as your goals or be big picture. But it's that saying like, shoot for the stars and you may just, or no, shoot for the moon and you just may end up in the stars or something. Like you may not end up at your final destination, but realize that it's the journey that you are taking and that you'll still end up somewhere amazing. And sometimes when you put too strong of boundaries around what you're going to shoot for, you don't give yourself opportunity to look and get maybe even more than you ever thought you would get as you head forward, if that makes sense. So, and I think the other thing is just when we increase visibility, it's so important to stay grounded with other people in your space. So, networking with your colleagues and peers for the rest of your life is so important, because that saying, then there's another saying, and I'm butchering all these sayings, by the way, but you'll go further together. So one of the people that I originally got connected with you through was Michaela Alexis, and she has been incredible as far as being a supporter and understanding. And she's helped bring me on stage, and I've helped bring her on stage to speak in different places. And that is really, really powerful to realize.
Ah, well, I think that's a great way to kind of wrap this up. So why don't you tell people how they can find you, how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, so Judi Fox, Fox, Judi Fox. I think the spelling is pretty clear, but every once in a while, you never know. Judi is probably the kicker, not the Fox part. And that's my website, judifox.com. And then you can go to all the socials. And then I love this, but like I said, send me a direct message. Let me know you watch this. Let's connect and carry on the conversation beyond this moment in time.
I love it. Well, thank you, Judi. And for those of you watching, as Judi was just describing, I have a special gift for you. If you, because I'm going to stop the broadcast on YouTube, but Judi and I are going to stay on. I'm going to ask her one additional question. And if you go to speaking.business and sign up for our email list, you will be getting exclusive content from these answers that I'm asking all these speakers I'm interviewing that only go out to email subscribers. So
It's going to
that's
be good.
speaking.business. Oh, no, you don't even know the question I'm going to ask you
Don't,
yet.
but I'm going to give a good answer.
Well, thank you so much, Judi. And thanks everybody for watching. And we'll see you next time on The Business of Speaking. Okay, we're done on